This episode of Stand Up and Holler is brought to you by Thrive Fantasy. Come prop up on Thrive Fantasy this football season. Thrive Fantasy is a daily fantasy sports and esports app for player props. With Thrive, you can eliminate the countless hours of research and focus on only the top tier athletes that have the biggest impact on the game. Choose 10 out of the 20 available player props to build your lineup. Each prop is assigned a fantasy value for both the over and the under based on how likely it is to hit. Hit the most props and rack up the most points to win a share of the prize pool. Use promo code REACT when you sign up today, and you'll receive a 100% instant first deposit match up to $100. Download Thrive Fantasy on the App Store or Play Store or by visiting their website, www.thrivefantasy.com. Sign up and prop today.
I'm Nick Nugent, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. And if you don't know Billy Napier from Adam's House Cat, then this episode is for you. We'll cover the core tenets to expect from Billy Napier's Florida Gators, as outlined by Coach Napier himself in his introductory press conference. Napier's take on 4- and 5-star recruiting, 4- and 5-star players in recruiting, how Napier plans to build Florida as a program, and we'll cap it off by revisiting Georgia's tragic collapse in the SEC championship game. Just such a shame. Everything in front of them, Will, such a shame. But before we start, Will, what did you enjoy more this past week? Georgia getting ripped on a big stage, or little old Brian Kelly speaking in front of his new family? It's my best attempt.
That was great. I mean, Gator Dave tweeted out that his Southern accent was insulted by Kelly's Southern accent, which I thought was just great. And it's nice that Florida has a guy from the South to be their coach, and his accent is real as opposed to somebody who was. Where's Kelly from? Is he from like Boston or something?
Yeah, I think Boston. I saw a lot of Ed Odron getting hired at Boston College jokes after that, and Ed O trying to do a Boston accent.
Oh, that would have been great.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear the Cajun Boston accent. That'd be pretty good. But no, it was pretty awful. And I think it's funny because it's sort of it's exactly what you'd expect from Brian Kelly. Like he has always struck me as the kind of guy who will tell you exactly what you want to hear, whether it's the truth or not. And so to have him down there in LSU at the basketball game, trying to, pulling the Hillary Clinton, trying to speak with a Southern accent, I thought was pretty good.
All right, let's jump into 2 bits, and we'll talk about the core tenets of the program here with Billy Napier. First thing I noticed, Will, when Napier got up to speak, is his demeanor. It's just cool, calm, deliberate, humble, focused, intense. He really, you could see what makes him a good recruiter. So I think most coaches, when they get up there, they stick to generalities in their introductory press conference. And if you kind of were tuned out a little bit the first time through, I kind of was like just listening to it generally, and then I zoned in. I watched it a couple more times and kind of zoned in. I'm like, this guy really outlined his core tenets. He really was very specific about what he wanted for the program and what he expects to build in Gainesville. He has to be one of the first college football coaches to quote from the book of Joshua also during his opening presser. He talked about the theme of his team's chapel this past season being the book of Joshua. They studied that. Joshua 1:9 specifically, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. First time I've ever heard the book of Joshua quoted, specifically that verse. But Will, a couple of tenets he hit on. The program's mission: make life-changing impact on the players. Players should experience success in life as a result of spending time in the program. Napier also said he wants to build his team to begin with the end in mind, which is to be a champion. Be values-based in what they do. He wants his players to understand commitment, self-discipline, sacrifice, and resiliency. He wants to have elite toughness, elite work ethic, and to do things with great class and integrity. Academics is a plan A, football is a plan B. He He wants to channel the energy that everyone has to win into the daily process, Will. So again, a lot of these bullet points are things that you will hear from coaches early on in their tenures. Obviously, everyone wants to build a solid foundation, get off to a good start. And a lot of football coaches are afforded the opportunity to do so out of the gate. But this guy, I guess what he comes in with some credibility because he's done it at another place. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the start of this process here, Will.
So there's a couple things there. One is that I hope that the Gators 2022 Bible verse in chapel, it comes from the book of Nehemiah, because that's the one that doesn't require any miracles. So let's go ahead and bring that one in about rebuilding Jerusalem. Sort of got Billy Napier in here. Got to go with the book of Nehemiah if you're going to ask me where we move next. The other thing is that, look, you don't win anything by winning a press conference. I think you can lose a press conference, right? I mean, you can glare at the people asking you questions on Zoom. You can reference recruiting season when you're getting killed on the trail. You can continually refer to things as neat. You can lash out when people ask you about a lookalike straddling a shark. There are all sorts of things you can do in a press conference that either make it about you or make it something somewhat negative. I think the interesting thing, the thing that was really telling to me is that Napier, when he was asked about whether he was a Gator fan in Georgia growing up, you could see he wasn't. But then he talked about growing up watching Steve Spurrier, watching Danny Werfel, and the respect that he and his father had for the program. And it was really interesting to watch him basically not lie, but not actually tell the full truth in terms of, essentially, I'm pretty sure he was either a Bulldog fan or something else, but certainly not a Gator fan at the time. So it was interesting to see him handle that. But the big thing for me is that in everything that he said, and you even mentioned it, right, that what he talked about in the entire thing is what's he doing pouring into the players. It's people-centered, relationship-centered type stuff. Now, it's easy to say that before the bullets start flying, right? Once the bullets start flying, then are you still people-centered? And that's really going to be the test of Napier. But I think it's definitely a change from the press conferences that we've watched over the last couple of months, where when Mullins asked questions about the team, I can't remember it necessarily being about the players. It was always, I'm a competitor. If you're a competitor, you shouldn't be out here, but I'm a competitor. I have high expectations, that sort of stuff. There was a little bit of that from Napier, but for the most part, it was, we're building into our players. We're building into our recruits. We're building relationships with our recruits. We're building relationships with our players over and over and over again. I think he said it like 4 or 5 times. He said one day at a time, one person at a time. And I really liked that phrase from the standpoint of what it means and what it sort of, he talked about having the end in mind when you start out, but then recognizing that it's a day-to-day process. It's putting things day to day and individualizing that for each player, for each recruit, for each staff member, and for Napier himself. So look, I mean, it's one press conference. I'm not going to get too excited. I think I was probably excited after Dan Mullen's first press conference. I don't recall being too excited after Jim McElwain's first press conference, but I was excited after Will Muschamp's first press conference. So it's not as though all of those turned into fantastic situations for Florida. And so one press conference isn't going to get me incredibly excited, but I do love the idea that it's a people-centered approach. And typically, I mean, anybody who's ever had a job or had a good boss knew that boss was people-centered, right? And anybody who had a terrible boss, pretty much that person had an attitude that was self-centered. And so having somebody who's at least going out there and saying the right things in terms of making sure that the program is people-centered, I think is a welcome change. And then also considering the reception that Napier got and the reaction that Napier got when he left Louisiana lends credence to that what he's saying is not just to be said, right? That he's saying it and he actually lives it, because otherwise the people in Louisiana wouldn't be so happy for the guy leaving them to come coach at Florida.
And to your point, Will, he did talk about the big ability that he's shown at Louisiana is his ability to connect with the players. He talked about the importance of showing players that coaches have authentic care in their heart. That was a phrase he used, was authentic care in their heart. The intangibles you want to see from the team, he wants to see great physicality on the field. That means they got to be in great condition. We saw the new strength and conditioning coach coming over from Louisiana with him. They want to be known for how hard they play. They want to be disciplined and eliminate careless play and turnovers. Again, we're not seeing anything revolutionary here, but these are nice things to hear after what we've watched over the last year. No,
it's almost like he'd already watched some tape of the team before he came over. He knew what to tell us to
like if he would have said
off.
something specifically about shoes, we'd be like, yep, okay. We will be sound and attack in all three phases. He wants to be unique in a tough 3-day prep for any opponent. They want to be, he said, put simply, we want to be a team that others dread to play. Again, it's the opening press conference. These are, I watched Cristobal's earlier down in Miami. The man was yelling into the microphone. He was so excited, and everybody's fired up down there too. It's easy to get fired up about a press conference. I actually was interested to see how Napier would do in the press conference coming in, because whenever I did a lot of research on him, watching a lot of old videos and old interviews with him, he's very subdued. He's very much an even-keeled guy, and I was wondering how he would be in this setting where he's got people waving pom-poms and shaking his hand on the way in, and the guy just it just felt like a natural situation. And again, you could see where even though he keeps that even-keeled nature to him, but you could see where that guy goes and sits in the living room of a recruit and looks in their parents' eyes, where that guy probably makes a solid connection with people.
Yeah, I mean, so one, it was nice to have a coach who looked like he had a tailor. That was great. And if you watch the Cristobal press conference, I mean, they gave him like a baby size jersey when they handed it to him. So that was pretty awesome. So they at least gave Napier a full size jersey when he came in. But look, I think from the standpoint of, could you envision your son going to play for him when he sits down in your living room? I think absolutely. And do you think he's going to be one of those guys who's going to be like incredibly fired up and just light into your kid? Like, he is not a Bobby Knight disciple, right? Like that's not what you're going to get, I don't think, with Billy Napier. Now, some of the guys that he brings in may have that kind of energy, and we'll see. I think you do kind of need a yin and a yang sometimes, because sometimes players need a kick in the butt and sometimes they need a pat on the back. And the trick is the coach capable of giving both of those? And is he capable of knowing when is the appropriate time to give each of those? And again, I think the fact that he was willing to give the players at Florida references, right? That he basically said, call my players at Louisiana and ask them how it is. And he was honest up front. And he said, some days they're not going to like me very much. And the reality is that I think will go a long way, because most people want to be pushed. Most people want to be great. And if you give them the opportunity to be great, and that requires that they take constructive criticism from time to time, they're going to be willing to do it, assuming that everything else is even keeled and consistent. And that's really the thing, is I think the even keelness means the hope is that you're going to get a consistent response from Napier, whether you do, when you do the same thing, right? So you do the same thing 2 games in a row, are you going to get a consistent response? And that's how you build relationships. That's how you build trust. And that's eventually how you build hopefully a recruiting juggernaut, if you're able to convince people in their living rooms that they should come to Florida instead of going to Alabama or Georgia.
Good segue into 4 bits here when we'll talk about that recruiting. And as you already used the phrase here, but he has a major emphasis on, quote, talent acquisition, unquote, in the state. Love that term. I think he called it a talent acquisition business. He was asked about basically stepping up from recruiting 2 and 3-star type players to recruiting the 4 and 5-star guys, which is something that is on the minds of a lot of Gator fans after seeing Dan Mullen piece together some okay classes, but maybe not that upper end talent that he didn't get at Mississippi State either. So it's something that is on the mind. So he was asked about it. He said, I think the important part here is that we don't get consumed with the stars, 4-star, 5-star. I think it's going to be more about evaluation. We're going to go through a thorough evaluation process. We're going to hire an army of people here. We're going to create an infrastructure, not only in the personnel department, but also from an on-campus recruiting, creative media, name, image, and likeness. We got a great vision for the organization that we're going to create here. So this is a guy that's coming in, Will. He's getting an assistant pool that's getting a raise of 1.5 million over the last 2021 assistant pool was approximately just over $6 million. It's bumping up to 7.5 under Napier here. That's a commitment from the university. We've also heard that Napier was a guy that was quite picky about his destination, where he wanted to go. I think that clearly that the university made some commitments to Napier in stepping up in some areas that maybe we haven't been as committed in over, or maybe we're behind in some of the elite recruiters. You see Alabama and Georgia come into the state constantly, take top tier talent. There's clearly some areas we're behind in, and it seems like he has that commitment to put boots on the ground and get that done. So we'll see how that goes, but it seems like we're heading in the right direction. There's a solid financial commitment to it, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think the financial commitment is not just to recruiting, though that's a big part of it. It's also to the program as a whole. I think there are some people who are going to make something of his 4 and 5 star comments. I think that's probably just generally coach speak. At the end of the day, if you've got enough analysts out there, it's usually pretty obvious who those 5-star talents are. And it's not a coincidence that every 5-star out there pretty much has an offer from Alabama, right? Like those are the guys who jump off the page. And those are the guys you really have to get. I mean, in fact, I think it's probably more important to get the top, 2 or 3 of the top 30 guys than it is to land, say, 7 top 100s. I'd rather have 3 of the top 30 than 10 guys between 90 and 100. That's just sort of the way the numbers work out. Look, I think every business is a talent acquisition business, but having Napier say that specifically, that he knows that he's not in a coaching business, that he is in a talent acquisition business. And it obviously he's going to have to do some stuff on the field in order, from a game management perspective and from a player development perspective, in order to put the Gators in the position to be where they want to be. But here's the deal. Nick Saban wins championships with a ton of 5-star talent. It doesn't guarantee winning championships. We're going to talk about Kirby in a couple of bits here. And so it doesn't guarantee winning championships, certainly doesn't guarantee beating Alabama. But I think the evidence suggests that it's a prerequisite to being able to compete with and potentially beat Alabama. And there's a reason why Saban didn't win a championship at Michigan State. Right. It's not because he was really, I don't think it's because he was that much better coach at LSU. I think it's because he had better players when he was at LSU. But the thing, so again, I think maybe measured is the right word to use when we describe Napier, both in the press conference and overall. If you listen to people who experienced the Napier era at Louisiana, his first recruiting class was pretty much right where the recruiting class was the year before for Louisiana. There was not some giant uptick, but they also didn't sign a whole lot of guys either, and they were patient. And that's really what he's sort of preaching. And in some cases, I think that really makes sense, because when you look at the 2018 class, that transition class for Dan Mullen, there were 20 guys in that class. You've got guys like Jacob Copeland, Richard Garage, and Emory Jones, who've obviously played major roles. Also Kyle Pitts, Amari Burney, and Trey Dean. But then you've also got Justin Watkins, who was sort of a late signee, who was ranked 89th overall, but then had legal problems and wound up getting kicked off the team. You had Damian Pierce, you had Lucas Kroll, who was a late add, who has done a great job for Pitt this year, but really didn't add a whole lot to the Gators. You got Andrew Chatfield, who's transferred out, David Reese, who's been injured, Malik Langham, who transferred out, Iverson Clement, who transferred out, Noah Banks got hurt, John Huggins transferred out, Chris Blake transferred out, Randy Russell had an injury. So you sort of go all the way down that list, and yeah, there's some hits up top, but just about everybody beyond the first 5 or 6 guys in that list didn't work out. And that's what you see a lot of in transition classes, for the very reason that Napier's talking about, right? That a guy comes in, turns out it wasn't the best fit, and he transfers out. Particularly with the transfer portal, I think that's probably something that's even more going to more likely to happen, right? As a guy comes in, he decides, I'll commit in December. If it turns out that it doesn't work out, I can always transfer someplace else next year. And Napier doesn't seem to want that, right? He doesn't want to make mistakes. He doesn't want the guy who's going to have the legal problems and they're going to have to kick out. He doesn't want the guy with the attitude problems. But if he sees somebody like Kyle Pitts, I'm pretty sure he's going to jump on them. So he's already out there visiting guys who've already committed. They was at McClellan's place, I think, today out in Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And so being able to go and identify those guys and say, we're going to secure that base. Nick Evers, the quarterback from Texas, that they're pretty much reaffirmed his commitment as well.
He seems to be in the hotbed of where he's comfortable recruiting as the Louisiana head coach. He's been in Louisiana, Oklahoma, Texas, right?
Yeah. Well, I think he's going to find his way back to Florida. That was one of the things.
Sure, but that's where he's starting. He's kind of seems like he's starting in that area where he's already comfortable.
Well, and he's got 10 days.
Right. So he probably has some relationships there. You see LSU getting losing guys left and right that I'm sure he's at least had conversations with, maybe not as a serious, as a serious contender at Louisiana, but I'm sure he at least has somewhat of relationships with them and their high school coaches. Maybe we could pick off one of these LSU guys who are falling off.
Yeah, but here's the deal. I mean, if you go look at if you look at Urban Meyer, he didn't have any 5-star signees in 2005. He had 7 4-stars and then
Right.
10 3-stars. The star system was a little bit more constrictive in 2005, but still, you look at Muschamp, 1 5-star, 10 4-stars, 8 3-stars. You look at McElwain, 2 5-stars that were late signees in February, 3 4-stars, and then 16 3-stars. And then Mullen, 0 5-stars, 12 4-stars, and 7 3-stars. The national rankings for Zook in his transition year was 10th, Meyer was 12th, Muschamp was 11th, McElwain was 21st, and Mullen was 14th. So, granted, Florida's ranked 40th right now, but that's more a numbers game than it is an overall player ranking. So if he holds on to the 11 or 12 commits who are there right now, maybe a few more than that, but if he holds on to the guys who are already in the space and adds maybe like 7 or 8 more, he's going to end up with a class somewhere in that 13 to 17 range, which, let's be honest, is exactly where Mullen was going to end up anyway. So essentially, if he can get a transition class in that 13 to 17 range, I think you say good job. That's right around where the rest of these guys have been in their transition classes. And with the early signing day, I think it makes it more challenging than back in the days of Urban Meyer and Will Muschamp. And so then you say, okay, well, now you have a full year to build relationships. That's your bread and butter. And so we're going to see with this bump class in 2023 whether he can really take a step forward, whether he can really lock down the state of Florida, because let's be honest, there are more guys on the all SEC team who are attending Alabama from Florida than there are on the Florida squad, because Florida doesn't have anybody on the all SEC team. And in fact, if you look at the Alabama squad, I think they have 3 starters who are from the state of Florida, who are in the top 50 in the state. And Florida only has like 5. So that's an issue, and that's an issue that Napier's going to have to fix. But I don't think he's going to be able to fix it by December. He might be able to start to fix it by February, but really next December is when we're going to know whether he's been able to fix that problem completely.
Now, looking around the state here, we see Mike Norvell. He put together. He's an okay class considering their situation. I think they're not in the top 10 though. But Napier's life definitely is going to be a little bit harder with the entrance of Mario Cristobal down in Miami. Well, I think there's still some questions on Cristobal as a game day coach, maybe on the conservative side, maybe almost like a Kirby Light on game day, a little bit conservative, going to rely on building that team through recruiting and rely on having the better players on game day on most Saturdays, it seems like, with him. How much of a challenge do you see Cristobal bringing into the South Florida market now that Napier, we got Napier coming in, we got Cristobal. How much do you see those two going head to head in South Florida for some of these guys?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think the teams that you really want to compare Florida to are going to be LSU and Georgia and Alabama. I think it's less those other guys in the state. Look, Florida State is, we talk about Florida being behind when it comes to facilities and infrastructure and those sorts of things. Florida State's behind there too. And so is Miami. And Florida isn't going to have any excuses. I mean, Napier, that is the one thing that I think we need to say up front with Napier is the football only facility is almost complete. The indoor practice facility is complete. All the facilities that people have talked about for years where Florida's behind, no longer behind. Napier made demands when he came in about what his analyst staff needed to look like, what his recruiting staff needed to look like, what his pool of head coaches needed to be paid, all that sort of stuff. And Florida has said, we're going to make a major investment in this. And so at the end of the day, if he cannot recruit the way Kirby Smart did, the way Kirby Smart does, the way Nick Saban does, the way Jimbo Fisher is right now, then that's on him. Right. And at the end of the day, there are no excuses left. I know in the McElwain era, it was, well, just wait until we get these facilities. And then Mullen comes in. It's like, well, wait until he gets these facilities. And I didn't buy either of his arguments. I think it's one of those things where it's like sellers sell. And at the end of the day, if you're good at it and you're able to sell, then you're going to get people to come to your university. I still think that's true. And I think we're going to find out pretty quickly whether Napier has that capability as a natural salesman at the level that he needs to for the SEC. But at the end of the day, there's no more excuses, right? And I think there are still some excuses in Miami. They don't have the same facilities that Florida's going to have or that Georgia or Alabama has. And so, look, I mean, nobody comes to watch those games. It really ought to be a pretty easy sell to say come into the swamp with 90,000 people screaming versus coming to South Beach and no one's going to know you're on the team because nobody attends the games.
I get where you're coming from as a Gator fan on that. However, when Miami's cooking, they do recruit. They can be an elite football factory for recruiting, man. So they got a guy in there with Cristobal coming in where he's easily going to pull top 10 classes down there. Do you think that I guess my question more is do you see with Cristobal coming in, whereas if Manny had stayed, that's going to be even more competition here in the state, or do you see that's more of like Alabama and Georgia's problem to worry about because we're not picking off a bunch of those guys anyway from South Florida at the moment?
I mean, maybe a little bit of both. I mean, the reality is you're always going to be competing against somebody. And at the end of the day, is Cristobal a little bit more competition than Manny? Maybe. I honestly don't know, right? I look at it and I
You
say,
don't think he'll recruit in the top 10 at Miami?
I think he's going to be right around the top 10. I don't think he's going to be. I don't think so. Right now, you look at Jimbo Fisher's class, the second ranked class in the country,
Right.
4 5 stars, 13 4 stars, 4 3 stars. I don't think Cristobal does that. And I think one of the reasons that he won't is because I think Napier is going to make sure that guys in Lakeland and guys in Jacksonville and guys in Orlando and that sort of stuff, that's where he needs to lock down. So you keep Cristobal stuck in South Florida, you pluck a guy out of there every once in a while, and you build the program. So this is the thing, right? Is Auburn brings in some new guy all the time. Do you think he's going to be able to threaten Saban? No. Saban's the GOAT. Like, and you bring in somebody new at Georgia Tech, say, is he going to be able to compete with Kirby? No. Like, no, just not going to, right? And the reason is because those guys have a stranglehold on the recruiting in those particular areas. So, I don't want to share recruits. If there's a guy in South Florida Napier wants to go get, I want him to be able to go get him. But you got to be able to prove that you have the ability to do that. And yes, Cristobal is additional competition, but at the end of the day, you're not trying to compete with Miami. If you want to compete with Miami, you could have cut Dan Mullen because he could go 7-5 for the most part if all the noise in the system wasn't going around. The reality is that Dan Mullen wasn't even really recruiting that poorly compared to what Miami was. But that's not who you're competing against. You're competing against Alabama. You're competing against Georgia. The reality is hopefully Napier has the ability to go up into South Georgia and start pulling guys into Florida, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of talent there too, and South Georgia is pretty close to Gainesville. So, I'm more worried about the guys in Athens and Tuscaloosa than I am about the guy down in Miami. Maybe he'll pull a few, and that's fine, right? I mean, there's plenty of talent to go around. The problem has not been that everybody's going to Miami or everybody's going to Florida State. The problem has been when you look at Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama. Every one of those programs is picking 2 or 3 or 4 of the top 50 in the state. And there's just table scraps left for everybody else.
Well, to your point, 5-star kid out of Lakeland, he was committed to Oklahoma all year and just flipped to A&M with the departure of Lincoln Riley. So that's Lakeland. That's Gator territory right there. You got to lock that down for sure.
Well, he can go on the Lincoln Riley Highway, the 3 inches of Lincoln Riley Highway right out of the state when he's going to Oklahoma, or when he's going down to Texas A&M. That'd be great.
All right, let's move on to 6 bits where we talk about building the program itself. Napier said, we're going to build the best football team in the SEC. We're going to build the best football program in the SEC conference. We must have a championship approach, and everything that we do to accomplish this goal, every choice, every decision, every habit that we build along the way, we're going to begin with the ending in mind, and that is to be a champion. He has 8 repeatable phases throughout the year, Will. 1, the foundation. 2, identity. 3, spring practice. 4, discretionary period. I like that one. Discretionary period. Couldn't come up with a name for it. 5, the summer regiment. 6, training camp. 7, in season, and 8, postseason. We'll have very specific goals and objectives for each one of these. And overall, the goal is to create an elite player experience. We talked about that, work together, make an impact, talking to the whole community, all of Gator Nation. That was another point he stressed in building a program. But Will, I did like in this quote that I started with here, he mentioned building a football team and then building a football program. What do you see as the difference between a football team versus a football program?
Well, I mean, I think we've sort of seen it the last few years, right? The football team was the 2020 team that went 8-4 and was able to score points all over the place, but then the defense wasn't able to pick things up, and it was undisciplined. And you had the shoe toss, and you had the fumble at the end of the A&M game, and they decided not to show up against Oklahoma, and those sorts of things, right? A lot of really good things that the team was able to do out there on the field, but nothing that was really sustainable that could then be carried over. And we saw sort of the carryover into 2021, whereas a football program is that you lose a guy to the transfer portal. We have a plan for that. right? You lose a guy to an injury. We have a plan for that. You make sure that you're strong up front. You know, the idea that he's going to call plays so that he can have a second offensive line coach. I gotta say that's smart, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if you believe in yourself enough to be able to call plays, to have a second offensive line coach, considering how much Florida has struggled up front the last couple of years, I think it makes a lot of sense, especially because then if that's a place you want to recruit, then you have two guys who can go out there and recruit specifically. I think it's bringing in a guy that you know on the strength and conditioning program. I know that some of the players wanted Nick Savage to stay, but here's the reality. Having a strength and conditioning coach that he knows means that he's going to have that strength and conditioning coach when no one else is allowed to have contact with the players from the staff. Someone that Napier trusts and knows his system is going to be the one who has access to those players on a day-to-day basis during the offseason. And he's going to be able to make sure that during the summer they are putting into place all of the different things that he talked about in those 8 phases. And you know, the thing that I liked was he talks about it being the journey, right? And but he said that he knows there's a high desire to win when the ball gets kicked off, but that it's critical to channel that desire to win into a daily process with a detailed plan executed phase by phase. That doesn't sound like a coach who's going to tolerate 15 false starts. Mm-hmm. That doesn't sound like a coach who's going to tolerate some of the, you know, not knowing the playbook, undisciplined play, jumping off sides, you know, poor special teams, all that sort of stuff, right? Daily process with a detailed plan executed phase by phase. Again, I think that goes to the idea of one day at a time, one person at a time. You mentioned that multiple times, that the field goal kicker is going to have a daily process and a daily plan that ties into those 8 phases, and he's going to have enough people to be able to execute that based on the money that Florida's committed. I think the same thing you can say. He said football is a game about people, strategy, and competition. It's going to be figuring out about how best to serve the players. So again, it's about the players. It's about the people. It's not about Billy Napier. And at the end of the day, I think the story he told about his dad and how his dad struggled with ALS, or didn't really struggle with ALS, but passed from ALS, but had the ability to handle and manage that with character. And that he was able to sort of see that through the lens of faith. Both his father was able to see it through faith, but I think Napier saw it through faith too. And that changed him from the standpoint of how he wanted to be perceived with his players. And so he's going to be hard on them, right? Because you need to be hard on guys who want to get to that next level and who want to be challenged. But at the same time, again, I thought it was interesting. He said football, and really when he's talking about a program is, you know, a strong program is one that's about people, then strategy, and then competition, right? That you don't go out and compete first and then figure out the people and the strategic part later. It's about people. It's about, do you have high quality people and do you have highly skilled people, right? Those 4 and 5-star guys that you bring in. It's about strategy, making sure you put them in the right position to succeed, but not just on the field, right? That you've got them strong enough. You've got, I think there was a quote you sent me from Twitter today where somebody had said that in the opener a couple of years ago at Louisiana, when they played Mississippi State, they were in a dome and Mississippi State was cramping in the 3rd quarter. And he said, it looked like Louisiana could go for another 3 or 4 quarters after that. And again, that's strategic, right? It's having a process to where the players are ready to go day one when the ball gets kicked off. And then it's competition. I think that's a big one too, because we've sort of wondered over the last couple of years, are the best players actually getting to play? And I think this year it became pretty clear the best players weren't getting to play. So again, I sort of go from, you know, what's the difference between a team and a program? I mean, that's the difference, right? Is that you've thought it through from a strategic standpoint where you say people, strategy, and competition. And by the time you get to competition, the game's the easiest thing you do all week long, because you've spent all off season and you worked hard all off season and every day to get better and put your plan in place. And by the time you get to the game, you're ready to go.
You know, you sit here and when you go through all this and it all sounds great and everything, but Mullen, Muschamp, McElwain, these guys had detailed plans, didn't they? You didn't walk into the University of Florida and take this one. Like for people who are looking at this going, well, it's the next guy. We're churning through coaches who are a little down on the program right now. What do you see as a difference with Napier versus what we've seen in with the last 3 previous coaches?
Well, I mean, so the first difference is that he had high level success at the previous place that he was at in
for 4 years.
for 4 years, and he built that program and was the number one recruiting team in the Sun Belt Conference for the last 3 years that he was there, right? Mm-hmm. So he built a program, and with similar resources to everybody else in the conference, was able to beat them at their own game.
Which,
right?
sorry to interrupt, but Muschamp, defensive coordinator at Texas, McElwain, 2-year head coach at Colorado State, really one recruiting cycle, right? Because after the second season, he's already in Gainesville. And then Mullen, we of course know Mississippi State, but didn't really go after the big fish as well here.
Well, and Mullen, it's interesting when you look at his overall recruiting statistics at Mississippi State. He improved things on a national level compared to Sylvester Croom, but he actually had a lower net conference recruiting ranking at Mississippi State than Sylvester Croom did at Mississippi State. What that suggests is that the SEC was getting better and Dan Mullen wasn't, right? That the SEC was improving from a recruiting perspective at a pace that was faster than what Mullen was. And I think that's really what you've seen, right? I think Mullen 10 years ago at Florida might have been the right pick, because he would have recruited at a level where you don't have Texas A&M recruiting at that level in the SEC. You wouldn't have had Georgia. Georgia would have been Mark Richt recruiting in that 10, 11, 12 range. Auburn was the same place. The only guy 10 years ago who was recruiting at this level was Kirby Smart, and then Urban Meyer when he went to Ohio State. And it has become a recruiting arms race. I mean, that's the reality, is that the resources that are being poured into it, the emphasis that's being put onto it, and the recognition of how important it is has greatly improved over the last 10 years. And so, Mullen sort of grew up. Dave Wunderlich wrote a really interesting article where Mullen grew up in an era where you could strategically differentiate yourself on the field, even if you had less talent. So, you think about Rich Rodriguez at West Virginia, you think of Mullen, right? When he was at Bowling Green in Utah, and then they come to Florida and with superior athletes start implementing an offense that allows you to get the ball out into space and win a couple of national championships. Nick Saban comes in and actually struggles against the Johnny Manziels of the world and those sorts of things, and then decides, oh, well, I'm going to now implement that sort of thing. I'm going to go out and put elements of the spread offense into my program that has these superior athletes. And so now the differentiation between the offense that's being run by, say, a West Virginia and an offense being run by Alabama is essentially nothing. The difference is that Alabama has way better players. And so that's really what's happened, is that the schematic advantages that people had 10 or 15 years ago is no longer there. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you can't be falling behind your peers when it comes to how you're recruiting. So the thing that I look at Napier and it gives me hope is that when it comes to the recruiting and when it comes to the actual building the program, you can measure this via Football Power Index, or you can measure it via S&P Plus, or you can measure it via just overall record, that Napier's been one of the best coaches in the country based on the level of talent that he's had for the last 4 years. And so that's not something you can say about any of these guys who came in before him. And so it's a different pedigree. It's a different preparation method. Doesn't mean it's going to work. I think we still have to see it on the field. And one of the things we're going to talk about in $1 when we talk about the SEC championship is how do you respond when you get punched in the mouth? And that's going to be the telling point, right? Is that when you get punched in the mouth, how are you going to react? And I think one of the things that people noticed this year with Dan Mullen is he was just far more subdued than he had been 2-3 years ago. The thumb wrestling guy who wanted to beat everybody at everything, was willing to challenge his team, was really sort of gone. And what that indicates to me is that when things started to go south, when he got punched in the mouth, his response was not to go back to his core principles. His response was to sort of hunker down and be defensive towards people in the media who are asking legitimate questions. Is Napier going to be that guy, or is he going to be the guy who, when he gets punched in the mouth, goes and works harder, figures out the solution, makes adjustments, brings in different guys, makes changes at coordinator positions, all those sorts of things? There are going to be some risks here. I think Patrick Toney at defensive coordinator, he's young. And so maybe 2 years from now, Napier says, you know what, we need to get somebody with more experience in here, and has to make a change. Is he going to be willing to make that change? Those are going to be the sort of things we got to look for.
It's going to be fascinating. Digging in here, it just seems like he's bringing a lot to the table that seemed to be missing over the last year plus here. So there's a lot that I liked. Listen, I was a big Dan Mullen fan. I was as big of a Dan Mullen fan as anybody, but just seeing how the program just seemed to kind of slip away over the last 12 months here, I think the move was right. And it seems like you got a guy who's almost the polar opposite in a lot of ways in terms of just level-headed, super organized type of guy. Where I think Mullen was more of a, hey, Mullen had a little bit of spurter to him, where let's draw it up in the dirt and we'll beat him. He had kind of that type of competitive edge to him, and I think you got a different type. This is a true Saban disciple coming in here, which I know that also makes some people leery because we've had two of those through town, and that didn't go as well. But I'll tell you what, it's something where when Will has hammered on the recruiting for like throughout the entire fall, but I know you've been doing it for years now. This seems like a guy that's going to come in and really elevate that around here, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Will, let's move over to a dollar. We'll talk about the Georgia Bulldogs. Have a little Schadenfreude here with Georgia's loss to Alabama in the SEC title game. And I want to remind everybody of a quote that Kirby Smart said after the Florida-Georgia game. Really, you could argue was the quote that maybe sent Florida into a tailspin this season. There's no coach out there that can outcoach recruiting. I don't care who you are. The best coach to ever play the game, the best coach to ever play the game better be a good recruiter, because no coaching is going to outcoach players. Kirby Smart said that. At the same time, Kirby Smart says that, he chooses to stick with a walk-on quarterback throughout the entire season. He went 12-0 with the guy, so you can't fault him there. But once again, on a big stage, Stetson Bennett, the mailman, couldn't come through. Bama ends up shredding. But you want to talk about Stetson Bennett? I kind of say that tongue-in-cheek, though, because even though it is a walk-on quarterback and you got a bunch of five-star quarterbacks on your bench there, Georgia, like – that's always been an interesting situation up in Athens. The reality of this game, Will, is Bama's offense just shredded which the unpenetrable Georgia defense. 5 straight scoring drives, 4 to finish the first half, 1 to open the second half, and then Bama gets a pick six early in the fourth quarter to run it up to 38-17 and really put the Bulldogs away and not give them much of a chance in this one.
Yeah, I mean, so look, I think there's a few things. One, the stat that really jumped out to me is that Alabama averaged 4.5 yards per attempt if you took away their 7 explosive plays, and Georgia averaged 4.4 yards per play. So from the standpoint of like whether Alabama was going to win this game, they were moving the ball more effectively than Georgia the whole night, and it wasn't just the explosives. Now the explosives obviously play a role and help move Alabama down the field and help them put up points, but it's not like Georgia was holding them and then they would hit a big play and then they'd hold them and then they'd hit another big play. That's not the way it worked. Alabama was moving the ball after that first quarter pretty much all night. Now, Georgia's up 10-0. And at that point, I'm like, oh my God, they're not ever going to have any competition this year. They're going to roll to a championship. And then all of a sudden, a 41-14 run later, and Alabama's way up. And you know, the interesting thing is they hit that deep pass to Jamison Williams. They had trips to the right. A completely blown coverage. I'm pretty sure it was by sign, completely blown coverage. Jamison Williams goes the whole way for a touchdown. It's 10-7. Georgia's still up, but they look shell-shocked after that. Like the defense looked like it couldn't believe that it had given up that play. In fact, it was hilarious that at the end of the game, Alabama needed a first down, and they completed the exact same pass to Slade Bolden. And again, it was Sign who was in the right position, but got beat this time by the guy running the cross. But that trips to the right where they had 3 receivers, Georgia just had any idea how to cover it. And this actually is the criticism. Well, there's 2 criticisms of Kirby Smart. One is that when Florida found the wheel route in 2020, Georgia had no answer. And no answer in the first half, no answer in the second half, when there was a quarterback who had the ability to execute the thing that they found against the defense. Georgia had no answer. And that same thing can be said for Bryce Young and for Alabama. The minute Alabama knew that they had no answer for certain things, then Georgia wasn't able to stop them. And the minute they found that thing, they just went at it. And the weakness of this team is the safeties. And they were able to take advantage of that repeatedly over and over and over again. And then there's the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is that the minute they got down by 2 touchdowns, the game was over. And the reason it was over is that you knew Stetson Bennett wasn't going to bring them back. And the question all year has been whether the defense was even going to give up 2 touchdowns, let alone whether Georgia was going to get down by 2 touchdowns. And now that we know it's possible for them to get down by 2 touchdowns, not riding through some rough patches with JT Daniels seems stupid because his upside's significantly higher. At least you think it does. Now, the difference is that he is an absolute statue back there. So he may have a cannon, but the problem is that, without the mobility, I think Alabama might have killed him too, especially since he hasn't played very much this year. So the idea that people are saying, well, now you should just switch over quarterbacks and you're going to win a national championship, I don't think it works that way. And from everything I'm hearing, it's not like JT Daniels was lighting things up in practice either. There's a reason why Stetson Bennett's been in there. It's because he's more consistent. The problem is he's not explosive. And so, when Georgia falls behind, they're going to struggle because they don't have the ability to fit the ball in there, and he's not an elite quarterback. And that really is interesting, that with all the recruiting and all the 5-star guys and all the different quarterbacks who've been through there, the last guy to start for Kirby Smart, who Kirby Smart actually recruited, was Jake Fromm. And Fromm was just good enough, but not quite good enough to get them where they needed to go. And, I would say maybe a rich man Stetson Bennett. And Bennett has a different pedigree. I mean, Fromm had a different pedigree, but at the same time, in terms of the way they throw the ball and their limitations and arm strength and all that sort of stuff, they're relatively similar players, to be honest with you. Fromm had less mobility, but Bennett has less ability to throw the ball down the field quite as well. But the guys that you're missing out on are the Justin Fields and even the Jamie Newman, and you've got Carson Beck and you got Vandergriff in there on the bench, and you've got JT Daniels and all these guys. And the idea that none of those guys have been able to step forward and push Stetson Bennett out of this role to where they have a game manager in there, I think is a problem. So, the Georgia defense sputtered, and that the idea that that's going to happen 2 times in a year, and I still think there's an opportunity here for them to win the national championship, and it's pretty significant. But they really harmed themselves by having to play Michigan first instead of having to play Cincinnati. And to be honest, if they'd have beaten Alabama, they wouldn't be playing Cincinnati. They'd be playing Notre Dame with Brian Kelly being gone and all that sort of stuff. And so, not getting Alabama out of the tournament is a mistake. And then, obviously, sort of showing that you're not Drago, right? It's Drago in the Rocky movie who gets cut. The Russians cut, and everybody knows now that this guy can be cut. And the other thing is, there's a lot of tape now about how you attack this defense. And is the quarterback for Michigan going to be good enough? Is McNamara going to be good enough to take advantage of it? I don't know. But Michigan's also a better running team than Alabama too, so they might be able to open up some things with their running game that Alabama wasn't able to open up. I think the reality is that Georgia got hit in the mouth and didn't know how to react. And the question is, are they going to be able to right the ship in the playoff, or are they going to get hit in the mouth in the first round of the playoff and get knocked out pretty early? I got to be honest. I think if they win the game against Michigan, they might win the national championship. I think they have an opportunity. I think they'll be able to make some adjustments against Alabama. I think that game will be a lot closer. In fact, if Bryce Young doesn't recover the fumble that he had in Georgia territory, I think that game might have been quite different.
Quite the bounce.
Yeah, but still, I mean, at the end of the day, you didn't recover the fumble. Fumbles are 50-50. And from then on, Alabama absolutely dominated you. And Michigan's a bad matchup. So I'm interested to see what happens. I'm not going to gloat too hard just because, they still get in the tournament, obviously. And I'd rather be in the tournament than not in the tournament. So I'm sitting there going, if you'd have told me before the season Florida was going to be 12-1, but they'd lose in the SEC championship game and they'd still be in the playoff, I'd be like, sign me up. Like, I would take that.
I got to be honest too. On most years, I would be furious about a situation where a team loses in the conference title game and is in the tournament still. But this Georgia team, they did enough work this year where it's absolutely deserved. And I think this Georgia-Michigan game has a chance to be one of the better playoff games we've seen. I still think Georgia gets it done. I can't. It's like I said too. I don't think this game. You might have a limited ceiling with Stetson Bennett, but that's the path. Is it too late to change from that? If you're Kirby Smart, you've committed to that path. And do you find it funny that this is the guy that's sitting there lecturing about out recruiting players and is committed to top of the line players at every position, but he won't do it at quarterback? Why? On the one hand, they did not, let's be real. They did not lose that game because of Stetson Bennett, right? Stetson Bennett he's not going to win you that game. but he didn't lose them that game either. The defense lets you down in that game. Stetson Bennett can only do so much. He's got that limited ceiling, but you need that defense to come through and play the way it's complementary football with this team, and that's their limitation right now. But I think you're kind of handcuffed to Stetson Bennett at this point. I don't know if you want to roll. You're really rolling the dice if you don't stick with him, in my opinion.
So I disagree with you that Stetson Bennett didn't lose in that game. If only because the minute Florida got down by, or the minute Georgia got down by 7, they panicked. And the reason they panicked is they knew they couldn't get down by 14. And the minute they got down by 14, the game was over. And so it's not necessarily that Stetson Bennett was playing so poorly in this game that he cost Georgia the game. It's that Stetson Bennett playing against Vanderbilt, Stetson Bennett playing against Missouri means that JT Daniels is not prepared to come in and play against Alabama when you're down by 2 touchdowns. The fact that he never took Bennett out in that game and that he wasn't even willing to entertain putting Daniels in that game says something about what he's going to do moving forward. I think it's a panic move to pull out Stetson Bennett at this point. This is what you decided. And whether you're right or wrong, this is what you decided. And to then say, well, we had one bad game and I'm going to pull this guy out who was lights out all year long because because we got beat by a team that's an excellent offense, I think is a bad move. I think if Stetson Bennett's in there against Michigan, I think they have a better shot to win than JT Daniels, especially with the pass rush that Michigan's going to bring. And I'm here for it. I think he probably will consider putting JT Daniels in there, especially if they're sputtering on offense. I think it's a mistake. I think if you were going to have JT Daniels in there, then you needed to get him snaps earlier in the year. And you needed to get the offense used to it. And the offense has essentially been designed for Stetson Bennett at this point. And so to then bring JT Daniels in and say, win it for us, be the savior, that's not fair to Daniels. It's not fair to Bennett. And at the end of the day, I don't think that this team's going to win the national championship because of its defense, not because of its quarterback.
So no shades of Cardale Jones at Ohio State there for you. What about Vandergriff or Beck? Let's go to that third string quarterback. There's only one Cardale Jones, baby.
Sure. Yeah. Let's go ahead, man. I hope he does. I hope he brings in JT Daniels because I think it'll be a disaster. I think Daniels is going to, I think there will be a strip sack when he gets drilled in the back at one point because that dude is a statue. And he may have a cannon, but he does not have that internal clock when the defensive end is closing in on him. And you've seen it. I mean, the reason he got hurt at USC is because he got drilled on a sack at a game, I think against Arizona State. You look at his first year, it was something like 20 sacks that he took in that first year at USC. And then it was something like 7 or 8 in the last 4 games last year when they were playing. I mean, they barely beat Cincinnati last year. I mean, Cincinnati's a decent team, was a decent team last year, but still, I mean, the reality is that this Georgia team wasn't too far off from what it is right now. Or at least, from a personnel standpoint, and that game with Cincinnati was pretty close. So I don't see anything that like jumps off the page that says, oh, JT Daniels was fantastic until he got injured. And then Stetson Bennett came in and was sort of a game manager. The thing that's made it hard for Kirby is that Bennett has played incredibly well. But I thought it was a really telling stat when they said, what was it? He had like 12 passes in the fourth quarter of the SEC championship game. And he had 12 passes the entire year in the fourth quarter thus far. This team doesn't know what to do when it gets into a close game. Zero clue. They had won every game by a significant margin other than that first game against Clemson. That's the only one that was a 1-score game, and it's the only game where it was close, but they were also ahead that entire game, and the defense won them the game on a pick 6, right? So at the end of the day, they've been ahead the entire time. They've been front runners the entire time. Alabama punched them in the mouth, put them behind, and they didn't know what to do. And so, that's actually going to be the growth that they have to show in these next 2 games is if Michigan gets them down by 7 or if Michigan gets them down by 10, are they going to fold like a cheap suit or are they going to come back and fight? And based on what we've seen in the past with Kirby Smart against excellent teams, when they've fallen behind, this is the thing. I mean, if I'm a Georgia fan, I went into that game. If I was a Georgia fan, I went into that game the most confident I've ever been that we were going to beat Alabama by 2 touchdowns. And up 10-0, I would have been gloating on Twitter like crazy if I was a Georgia fan. And they all had their hearts ripped out. And so you see that SEC, what is it, the SEC shorts where they've got the Georgia fan meeting up with Hope and all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's real, man. They pucker up like Red Sox fans in
I,
2003.
I was going to say, dude, when I was growing up, my introduction to college football was through the lens of Ohio State football in the 1990s. And for those of you that know that, John Cooper against Michigan, not so good. You had 1993, 1995, 1996. Ohio State entered the Michigan game undefeated. Last game of the season, walked away with an L in those three of those 4 years. And Lee Corso used to always say on game day, it's the helmets. It's in their heads. It's the wing. They can't handle that winged helmet. And I wonder with Georgia, how much of that, like you said, you're up 10-0. Bama hits that big pass. Oh boy, here we go. How much of it is a mental hurdle right now with this team, do you think? I mean, is that more things that the media plays up, or is that something where, like you said, Alabama, maybe the pucker's a little tighter because it's Alabama?
Dude, did you see him fold? I mean, I was literally watching that game. Like it's 10-7. You're like, well, maybe there's some hope here. And then all of a sudden it's 14-10. You're like, oh. And then, I mean, I think they got it back to 17-17 on a drive where there was a defensive holding and 2 pass interferences to help move it down the field. And they hit one big play for a touchdown to make it 17-17.
But they immediately gave up a touchdown before halftime.
Absolutely. And then Alabama just went back down. And here's the deal. I mean, nobody in the Crimson Tide uniform is afraid of Georgia. And, it's almost like Coach Klein on the Water Boy, where he's like looking across at
Brian Kelly again.
Oh man, but I mean that is what I'm kind of thinking of, right? Is that the coach of the Mud Dogs is staring across at the rival coach for Mississippi and looking over there and intimidated. It feels that way a little bit when it comes to Kirby Smart versus Nick Saban, right? He can say all the right things that the teams in 2017, 2018, 2019, all those teams don't really matter. That those results don't dictate what happens this year. But your team came out and just folded, man. And that's the thing is if I'm a Georgia fan and I lose by 3, that's a close game. There are a couple of freak calls that go against me, and you end up getting beat. Okay, but this was an ass kicking, and so this wasn't close. And not only was it not close, but you dominated the first quarter, and then just got absolutely blown out of the building. And that sort of stuff, the way that cascaded, the way it snowballed, suggests that it's more than just a team that was athletically superior came out there. It was Alabama knew what they wanted to do. They had specific things they wanted to target for against Georgia, and Georgia had no answer. And again, if I'm a Georgia fan, that's what concerns me. It's not that Alabama was able to find multiple things to isolate. It's that Alabama went to the same well multiple times, and they saw it on film. They executed it when they needed it. And once they found it, again, to use the boxing analogy, once you cut the guy, you just keep hitting him right in the cut, right? Like there's no reason to put body shots in, just keep hitting him right in the cut. And eventually that eye swells up to a point where he can't see anymore. And that's what it felt like Alabama was doing to Georgia, is they saw the weakness and then they went after it, and they went after it over and over and over again. And Georgia didn't have an answer. And it felt like the wheel route where Mullen went to it over and over and over, and Georgia didn't have an answer. And so what that means is if I'm a Georgia fan and Georgia gets into a game with either Michigan or with Alabama or Cincinnati in this playoff, and one of those teams finds something, I don't have confidence that Kirby Smart's going to make the adjustment to take it away from the defensive side, right? It's been so easy all year because his defense has been physically superior and they haven't played a great quarterback. Well, now, McNamara's pretty good, and Michigan has a good running game, and they're going to have to play Bryce Young again. And Young obviously is really good. These are guys who have the ability to pick you apart if you can't make adjustments. And so, to be honest, that game kind of reminded me of a Todd Grantham coach defense on the defensive side of the ball, where you're looking at it and there's a lot of window dressing in terms of things that they're trying to do differently. But at the end of the day, Alabama dictated the matchups that they wanted. And when they got them, man, did they go after it, and they hit it every time. And, I don't think Alabama will have the same approach against Georgia in the next game, but I think they'll find something. And when they find that weakness, is Georgia going to be able to close that off and make the adjustment? They didn't show it last year against Florida. They didn't show it last year against Alabama. They didn't show it this year against Alabama. I don't know why I'd have confidence that they'll show it in the playoff if they get pushed onto their heels.
Credit to Bama for playing extremely well too. They did not play that well in the Iron Bowl. They didn't. That was not a pretty game, and especially Bryce Young, who, in my opinion, might be the most underwhelming Heisman candidate in a long time, but it seems like he's going to be the guy that ultimately gets the trophy on Saturday here. Really just the ability to take off and scramble at times. We hadn't seen a lot of that. He's capable. He's a capable runner, but I think I saw someone post his rushing stats for the season were lower than what he posted against Georgia on Saturday. I think it was like 40 yards to 37 yards or something like that. He's not a guy that looks to run a whole lot, even though he's capable of it. And it seemed like he was more aggressive against Georgia on Saturday, and that really opened up a different wave for the Tide to ride there. So Alabama beats Georgia again. Don't bet against Nick Saban. Don't bet against Nick Saban. I might have been saying roll Tide a couple times last Saturday.
I might have made some money on the Tide this weekend. So
I had an argument. Here's with my dad on this one. He's like, I'm just so sick of Alabama. I'm like, there's no way you can root for Georgia. It was more of an anti-Alabama thing for him. Yeah, you can't root for Georgia. You cannot root for Georgia. I can handle Alabama again. I cannot do Georgia. And Will, this is a good segue. You got a little Amazon product up there for the folks for Christmas here.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know what to get the Georgia fan, for those of you who don't know what to get the Georgia fan in your life, I have written a book. I am a certified author on Amazon. The book is called 1,980 Reasons to Root for the Georgia Bulldogs. It's got some really nice quotes on the back. So one of the quotes on the back here is this, which book is fully
it's the extent of your writing of the book.
Oh, absolutely. So if we look at the inside of the book, it shows this is what's on the inside of the book. It's completely empty, just like Georgia's trophy case. And on the back, there's a bunch of fake quotes. So my favorite is Justin Fields saying, "This book fully describes my experience as a Georgia Bulldog." And then Treon Harris saying, "3 of the 6 times I've read that book, I've really enjoyed it." So if you want to put extra salt in the wounds of your Georgia fans or your Georgia friends out there, have them open that up under the tree. Santa Claus should get them 3 or 4 copies. I'll even autograph it for them if they want it, just so they can, there'll actually be something in the book then when they open it up. So actually, there is on the last page, it does say "Go Gators." That's the only thing in the entire actual book, other than it being completely empty and the titles of the different chapters.
I have a feeling somewhere Steve Spurrier would be proud. That's
I
like it.
And it's not even a coloring book, so
yeah. That's why it might not appeal to them as much. It might not appeal.
Well, hey, it can be a coloring book. There's a bunch of blank pages.
There you go. All right, Will, another episode of Stand Up and Holler in the books. Be sure to check in with us next week. We'll get back to Sunday or Monday next week. I had some technical difficulties this week. Got that straightened up and in order. We'll be back on schedule next week. Thanks for tuning in to Stand Up and Holler. I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles. Be sure to check out our website, readandreaction.com, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining. And as always, go Gators. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel, join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week, and check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators.